Mass Effect 3 was the classic third-person shooter RPG developed by BioWare and published by Electronic Arts almost 10 years ago. And I just recently completed the game. I just recently completed the Mass Effect trilogy, actually. I started it several years ago with Mass Effect 1, I played Mass Effect 2, and Mass Effect 3. And when I finished it, I just had this impression that I needed to say something about this game. Not just what this game was, but sort of what this game meant. I feel like the impression that this game left with me is different than any of the other two. And it's not because the other two weren't good. I think the other two were great games. But this game really stuck with me, and for reasons that we'll get into in just a moment. First of all, before I get into this, let me say I'm not a Mass Effect lore nut. I'm not a huge fan of all the other media out there. I haven't seen the Mass Effect films. I haven't been a regular player of the online Mass Effect multiplayer, which is still going on, by the way. But I did complete all three games. I'm a completionist, so I got a complete galactic readiness score of 100%. I did all the side quests, so I had the massive full-scale armada that you can bring into the final battle. So I do know what I'm talking about, but I'm not coming at this from a Mass Effect fanboy standpoint. I'm just someone who plays games, and I noticed that this game is wildly different from the games that we're seeing today. I noticed that 10 years ago, we did something that I don't think we've seen since, and that I don't know if we will ever see again, and certainly something that we will not see again in the certainly not in the foreseeable future. So let's talk about what this game was and why it meant so much. But first of all, let's go over the basics. Mass Effect is essentially a third-person shooter. I mean, it's more than that, but the game sits on three major pillars. First of all, you have conversation, where you talk to characters and you choose, what you want to say to them. Second of all, you have combat, and third of all, you have exploration, but that exploration element gets lighter as you proceed through the games. The first game has massive exploration. You actually explore planets, you take part in some battles that are a little bit bigger, like you fight against the Rachni, things like that, where there are other NPCs helping you. But for the most part, as you proceed, the exploration diminishes to where you just sort of go from hub world to hub world, and you just kind of walk around the areas and you click on things that you can interact with, and then you automatically collect it. I will say that I like the way that the exploration is done in Mass Effect 3. You're never walking around looking in every little corner for something that you can interact with. The stuff you can interact with is highlighted in a red circle, and I think that's actually kind of a nice change. That way you know that you're not missing anything. If you don't see that red circle over something when you get close to it, you know there's nothing there. So it allows you to explore but still move on. So if you're not exploring or fighting, you're talking. When you talk to people, this is when you shape what your Commander Shepard is going to be like. Yes, you can pick their background, you can pick if you want to play with a male or female character, but for the most part, your journey is going to be unique from person to person. And in that way, I feel like the RPG element here is really interesting. Games do this in different ways, usually with party dynamic, with the party members that they bring with them, with the classes that they choose. But here, the actual narrative changes. The game doesn't just look different from player to player, it feels different. Your connection to characters is different. Which characters are alive changes. The actual outcome of massive galactic conflicts changes in substantial ways. When you're playing Mass Effect 3, because of the choices you make in conversation, you feel like you've taken part in a unique experience that is all your own. So those are the three pillars of Mass Effect: conversation, combat, light exploration. So let's get into what is really good here and what isn't so great. First of all, let's talk about what's really good. First of all, what I really love about Mass Effect 3 is the combat. And that's saying a lot, because the first game, combat was the weakest part of the entire package. But here the combat is fast, it's fun, it's tactical. But it's not tactical from the standpoint of telling your squad mates where to move. It's tactical about when we use what abilities and which abilities we use in complement to other abilities. It's similar a little bit to the combat of the XCOM third-person shooter that came out, but again, it's less focused on positioning and more focused on which powers to use when. It's not just spamming powers at the enemy. So the combat here is really fun and really engaging. Also, obviously, the narrative. This is a BioWare game, but it really stands out in this third and final chapter. The stories in the other two have been good as well, but the first game is more of an introduction. The second game is kind of a middle arc that focuses on individual stories of characters. The third game brings it all together in a way that is heartfelt. Like, you'll see the fates of characters play out, you'll tell people goodbye, you'll see the end of these massive conflicts, and it will definitely make you feel something, and that's rare for video games. So what didn't work too well in Mass Effect 3? Well, like I said, the choices you make are very important, but sometimes they don't feel all that important. For instance, if you romance a character, for instance, and I don't want to focus on the romantic element too much, people get too caught up about that with Mass Effect 3. But let's just say you do, you'd expect, okay, that character's going to be like your significant other, correct? Well, kind of, but also not all the time. Like, sometimes they'll respond to you in ways that like a significant other would, and other times they kind of won't. Or you might hook up with a different character even, and sometimes they'll react, or sometimes they won't at all. The problem is you have so many different choices and you can do so many different things. I feel like the writers and the devs got a little bit stretched thin to sort of accommodate every single choice in every single play style. So sometimes your actions and the reactions you get do feel very novel, and sometimes they do feel canned because they simply couldn't account for every possible choice that every player might have made and to make all of those outcomes really compelling. So sometimes you feel really close to some characters and sometimes you just sort of don't. It's just the limitations of having people being forced to write out all of these different outcomes and then having devs program all the different outcomes into the game. Also, the game is limited by its initial premise. Remember, this game is trying to depict a massive war that could essentially decide the fate of all sentient life in the galaxy. It's an extinction level event on a galactic scale. I mean, the scale here is mind-boggling. It's something that you only see done in comic books, because to do it in a realistic way on film or TV would be, impossible to really bring to life. But this game tries to do that, but you're hamstrung by only having 3 elements of gameplay: conversation, ground combat with a 3-man squad and no more, and basic exploration where you fly around on a little 2D map and you just scan planets and run away from Reaper ships that pop up. That's it. And you just feel like there's so much happening in space, but you can't take part in the space battles at all in any way. There are no turret sections, there's no times where you command the Normandy when things are getting hot, nothing like that. Also, the massive battles that we see basically take place in cutscenes. Every single fight comes down to you and your 3-man squad and no more deciding the fate of the battle or the galaxy, and you don't really see the battle at large happening. It just feels like you wish you could interact with these events in a deeper way than what you are able to do. But given that, I still feel like the game manages to put you in the thick of things relatively well while remaining sort of constricted by only putting you in these small-scale 3-person squad battles. It still manages to do a pretty good job of making you feel like you're right in the heart of things. So what's my final review of Mass Effect 3? Well, there are some other little foibles we need to talk about. For instance, in order to originally play the multiplayer, you needed an EA account, which is ridiculous. Also, your progress in the single player was tied to you participating in the multiplayer or using the game's mobile app, which is just a bad look. Now look, the multiplayer and its community are great, honestly, but my ability to fully complete the game the way that I want should not be tied to my participation in the multiplayer, particularly when the multiplayer is not free to access. Particularly when at this time, when the game was released 2012, a lot of people didn't have high-speed internet, especially in rural parts of the country. I mean, you're forcing people to sign up for Xbox Gold, which is a paid service. So a little bit of that games as a service thing kind of started to creep in here. But the game did offer you ways around this. You could still complete the game without using the multiplayer, and you could participate in Xbox Gold using the 2-day pass that came in the box. That's what I did, and I used it, and I got this game almost 10 years ago, and the pass still worked, and I used it, and I hopped on. I had a great time for 48 hours, but I'm not paying for Xbox Gold just to sort of improve my Mass Effect 3 overall final stage, all right? But I went ahead and I did it. So with that stuff in mind, I mean, there were some missteps with Mass Effect 3, but overall, it was a legendary game. If you haven't played all of the games, I would recommend you go back and do it. They've recently come out with a Legendary Edition that has no multiplayer. This is the time to jump on. I wanted to make this video to say if you have not jumped on the bandwagon already, please do it. You're missing out if you don't. If you're a fan of third-person shooters, hop on. But now that quick review is out of the way, that's not the reason why I made this video. I like talking about Mass Effect 3, but I think there's something else we need to talk about in this game and its legacy, and why we haven't seen something like this since. Mass Effect 3 came out in 2012. I keep saying that because it's 2022 at the time of this recording, almost 10 years later, and we have not seen a game or a trilogy or a narrative arc in game carried out quite like this since. Yes, we got Mass Effect Andromeda, but it hasn't lived up to the shadow of its predecessor. And I like these new games that come out. I really do. I'm a big Halo fan. Call of Duty, Battlefield, all that stuff is great. But those games are often made, especially the yearly release of Call of Duty, to sort of say, okay, it's been this amount of time. Let's put out another one of these games and let's make some money off of it. Let's keep people engaged. Let's keep making money. The idea of developers sitting down and saying, let's make a 3-game arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. After that, we wipe the slate clean. If we want to come back and do something different later with different characters and a different story, fine, but we're going to leave it at that, and we're going to put everything into it. We're going to leave it all on the table, and that's it. I don't think that's where the gaming industry is anymore. For the amount of effort that was put in to make these games, especially Mass Effect 3, you can make a ton of smaller games, a ton of little copycat games. You can make mobile games. And again, I'm not trying to hate on anyone's stuff, but the level of detail, the attention that was put into these 3 Mass Effect games, particularly the last third one, is remarkable, considering that it's primarily a single-player experience. There are some great single-player experiences out there, like what's going on with The Legend of Zelda in Breath of the Wild. That's great. But the level of narrative care is just different here. And I'm not saying that it's better than that, but it's just different. The finality of it all, the way that it all comes together, the way that it's balanced. I just don't see developers in the future saying, no, let's plan out this massive 3-story arc and let's bring it to life. A lot of it now is about games as a service. A lot of it is about how can we get the player playing and paying us as long as they can. Why would developers spend all this time to make these great single-player experiences that you'll play once, maybe twice, and then put down? They wouldn't. That effort is going into other games. It's going into Battle Royale and PUBG and stuff like that. I'm not trying to criticize those games, to each their own. But these types of experiences, this massive, mostly single-player, 3-story epic that is a AAA title that thousands of work hours have been funneled into over years, that type of thing isn't happening anymore. And we've sort of lost that as an industry. And now that this game is getting attention again, now that we're paying attention with this, with the Legendary Edition that came out in 2021, maybe now we can sort of look back and sort of see what we've lost and say, man, I thought games were going to progress. I thought we were going to go boldly forward, but it seems like we're sort of going backwards somehow. And I just feel like that's a shame, because games like this really stick with you. This game, in some small way, improved my life. And I think it did that for a lot of other people as well. And I'm not saying this as a massive Mass Effect 3 fanboy. I'm just someone looking at the state of games and saying they've changed. And I don't know if they've changed for the better. In fact, I don't think they have. And I applaud Mass Effect 3 for being what it was and for being something incredible. when we could have actually partake in something like that, because I don't know if we'll ever get a chance to play something like this ever again.